let's finish animating the villain. We only have one more task left, and that's to finish up the sword arm. I would also like to point out that if there's anything you'd like to tweak further, you can always wait till the very end when we just double check our work, making sure that we're satisfied with the entire performance. All right, so let's go ahead and get started by grabbing the right arm and elbow controls. Let's make sure that we adjust the timing of the sword so it falls faster to show its weight. So I'll go ahead and take the key on 32 and simply drag that to 31. Great, now you can see that we have a bounce on 36. I don't quite like this because notice it just translates up, and then by the time we get to 40, then the arm slides over. It's very linear. So I'd almost like to start from a clean slate when it's time to work on this bounce, and just go ahead and delete the key on 36. Now the flow is a lot nicer. Great. Now before we animate this in-between, this bounce, I like to work on finishing up the end of the animation. Then we can come back to fixing what happens as the sword falls. There's no real reason why I decide to do that. It's just my workflow. You might decide to work on the bounce first, but it's not a set rule to work on the end before you work on the section before. Unless you'd like to make it a rule, then it's okay. All right, so let's go ahead and think about this. We're looking at the timing in which the sword slides over. We're also thinking about its weight. And we need it to kind of pull the arm just a little bit and influence the wrist. So let's go to frame 50 and we'll rotate it away from the body. And here's what we end up with. The sword kind of sliding, and that pulls the wrist a bit as that happens. And then for slight recoil, we can bring it back towards the body on 55. So when we hit play, here's what we have. Very nice. That might be a little bit too much on 55, so I'll go ahead and drag it away from the character so it's very subtle. So at this point, we can go ahead and animate an arm drag. So again, thinking about the weight of the sword here, let's go ahead and go to our last frame and pull the arm. Not much. And watch this. When we play this back, we get this very nice arm slide that shows weight. Very neat. This is a really fun project. All right, well, let's say we go ahead and take a look at the sword from our ground level. You can see that it's going through the floor. So we'll need to fix that. We'll head over to our curve editor, and we'll grab our y-axis. If I were to switch to the rotate tool, you can see that clearly it's the y-axis that needs to be tweaked. Now going to frame 40, it's not an issue. The sword is exactly where it needs to be. So let's go ahead and tweak 50 and 55. Let's zoom in here. And now we'll grab both keys. Start to drag them up. Remember, you can always turn on interactive update. That might help to see your adjustments immediately. All right, so that's definitely getting there. On frame 50, I'd like to drag the key up a bit more because you can see that it kind of dips down. The sword does at that point. So I've just brought the key up a bit higher. Now we no longer have that sliding problem from 50 to 55. So now it's just a matter of tweaking this until that problem no longer exists. We could always right-click and use the Add Keys tool. And then switch this back to the Move Key tool until we have remove the sliding. What we need to be careful of is animating this change frame by frame, because that tends to lead to a very wobbly animation. So we just need to be very careful. And it really all depends on where you'll render this from. If this is more of a top view, well, you can't even notice that interpenetration that we're tweaking right now. But then, of course, you will have a floor in your scene, no doubt. So that's something to keep in mind. But just make sure that you don't add too many keys to cause the animation to look very wobbly. All right, so I think that works very well. Let's go ahead and move forward and now focus on adding a bounce to the sword. So as the wrist falls, taking a look at the angle of the sword here, let's go ahead and have it bounce on frame 33. So we'll go ahead and lift the wrist up. But again, thinking about the weight of the sword, we'll want to rotate the wrist down so that the blade touches. Great. Then a few frames after, let's say 3 frames, and just thinking about the weight here, on about 33, we'll go ahead and rotate the blade up slightly, and then go ahead and drop the wrist. Now I'd like to have the blade fall on about 38. Let's go ahead and have that drop by rotating down in the x-axis. And now we can play this back. Feel free to hide your controls and the don't select layer. So we're just focusing on the performance. Beautiful. Take a look at that. That's really cool. So we've managed to finish up the right arm, and that, for the most part, finishes our work on the villain. And now all we need to do is look for any areas, let's say around the shoulder, that might need some volume brought back. I'll go back to layers. Let's go ahead and show our controls. Select the shoulder. And taking a look at this, 29 looks good, so we'll need to tweak 32. And I'll adjust the C channel. 36. Again, we'll go to the C channel. And then there's just one more frame to check, and that's 40. And again, I think we could just adjust this third channel to fix it. All right. So guess what? That finishes up our work on the villainess. Let's say we move to the heroine in the following lesson.